And we're on to our first topic, topic A, which is to determine the appropriate project methodology, the methods and the practices which are available to us. And there's a lot of consideration in terms of, are we going to go with the traditional waterfall approach, or should we adopt an agile approach? Or should we even adopt a more comprehensive combination of them both? Now, I've always said, wherever possible, the most robust projects that I've ever worked on are a combination of lots of bits and bobs from various approaches. A bit of Prince2, a bit of PMI, a bit of APM, and so on and so forth. They're all relatively similar. Now, although we can stick to the structure of PMI, we can still apply the project through an agile environment. I'm going to leave the choice entirely up to you how you go about this, but let's have a look at the options that are available to us. There are, as we know, a couple of project methodologies that we focus on during this course. The first one we'll have a look at is Agile. And the thing to understand with Agile, it's a more modern approach from the mid-90s, where teams work collaboratively with the customer to determine what the project needs are. In other words, it's more focused around, okay, customer, tell us what you want. Let's then collaborate to work out the list of priorities. And then what we will do is we will work with that list of priorities to ensure that what we deliver is fit for purpose. No more, no less. There's no bells and whistles. And this is kind of the beauty of using Agile. So what's the difference then of when comparing it to waterfall? What are the core differences that in an Agile environment, time, cost, and quality are fixed? In other words, there's no more time, there's no more money, and the quality is fixed from the onset, from very early on in the feasibility of the actual project itself. Whoa. Now, that is radically different from waterfall. And some of the core things about waterfall is we can have tolerances. We can ask for more time. We can ask for more money in order to achieve the list of preferences which are in the project plan. Okay, so how do we do that in Agile? Because things must go wrong in Agile environments. No, of course they do. But what we do instead of asking for more time or more money, we drop the lesser important features. Now remember, we use the prioritization technique, Moscow. So what we would do first is we would look at all of the features which are could-haves and say to ourselves, well, we could deliver these, but they're not necessary. The only thing that's necessary in an Agile project environment are the minimum usable subset products, which are known as the must-haves. These are the minimum viable products or the minimum viable services. Once we've cut out all the could-haves and we release that resource back into the project environment, we can then start chopping away, if need be, at the should-haves. But remember, the must-haves are sacrosanct. We cannot drop any of the must-haves because that's the minimum usable subset. That's what the customer is expecting as the absolute minimum. Trust me, you start dropping the should-haves, they'll get upset. But remember, we can still deliver an Agile project output without delivering the should-haves. A question I often get asked when using these type of methodologies, well, how do I determine what a must-have is? And the question is very, very simple. Just go to the requirement that the customer has stipulated. And project managers, all you need to do is say to that customer, in the absence of this feature, this requirement, would the output still work? And if the answer is, well, yeah, we could still use it, then it's not a must-have requirement. A must-have requirement means that in its absence, the output will fail. So it's just worth bearing that one in mind. So as we go through our Agile environments, as we've already said, we will go through various increments, various time boxes within those increments, and constantly collaborating with our customers, our stakeholders, to determine if this indeed is still on the correct course. That's the beauty of Agile. It's fantastic. Now, predictive or plan driven, this is a more traditional approach, and there's brilliance behind this as well. In very low, complex, complicated, low risk environments, like construction, for example, where we know how we're going to assemble the actual construction event, whatever it is, a building, a road, a playground, whatever it is that we're developing. We've got a plan that drives the project on. And it's very, very clear of all the steps that we're going to go through. And in this case, it's one of those where there's low ambiguity. And the project team need potentially little management or intervention because it is very clearly defined. What they have to do is to return the results at regular intervals through meetings, updates, progress reviews, whatever, to show that we are indeed on track. So to put it into context, it's a traditional approach where the project needs, requirements and constraints are understood and the plans are developed accordingly. And it's through that low ambiguity that makes this so appealing. Why go through all the trouble of introducing agile environments, which can be challenging in some cases, when a very simple plan is all that's needed? Makes sense, doesn't it? So when you're starting to look at these low areas of complexity, maybe consider using this predictive plan-driven approach. Okay, but hang on a minute. I've got quite a wide scoping project that has high levels of complexity in some areas and really predictive areas throughout. So surely, could I not combine the two together, like put them both into the cooking pot, so to speak? Absolutely. So when we start looking at these hybrid versions, we can use combinations. Some people call it WAGILE, waterfall and agile combined together. You can call it what you will. But there are methodologies out there that will help you to embrace this. It's a combined approach that uses the strategy from agile or predictive planning to meet your needs. And all I'm going to say to you, project managers, it's up to you to determine what's going to be best for you. I'm a huge believer. I firmly believe in don't keep all your eggs in one basket, that you do need to look at alternatives. So a couple of core documents that we need to embrace here, in no particular order, but the business case is the justification. Now, let me just put this into context. You've worked, hopefully, on many projects in your career. Have you ever worked in a project environment where there was just no justification for continuing? You kind of thought to yourself, why are we doing this? I can't see how any business need is really being achieved by the inception of this project. Where's the document that drove the decision process on? And we often refer to this as the business case. And the business case can evolve through lots of different scenarios to become a fully fledged, fully functional business case. But crucially, it is the document that understands and helps to relate back to that justification. Why are we doing this? And at each touch point throughout the life cycle of your project, we can review that business case to determine if that justification still exists. Now, of course, if it doesn't exist, there's a contender there for premature closure. And the headings that you have within a business case, well, it does depend on the type of business case that you're undertaking, and there can be a multitude of different setups. But we'll look at the business case in more detail a little bit later on. What about this business needs document? Well, the business needs documents, you can see it down here. This is really like a high-level overview of what it is that we're going to deliver. And it may be written prior to the formal business case. And some people might say, well, the business needs documents might be some sort of formal statement of work or mandate. It can go under many different titles. It describes what needs to be created and what needs to be performed in order to achieve what it is that the project truly represents, kind of in alignment with the vision. Now, potato, do we need a business case? Do we need a business needs document? I would say there has to be a trigger that starts this project up, that leads to the inception of a business case. So these documents will exist, I would imagine, in some shape or form of another. Now, whether or not you want to call them by their official titles, the business case, the business needs document, I'll leave that decision up to you. For the purposes of this course, we're going to say, yes, you need them. But I will leave that decision entirely up to you in terms of what they will be called. But they still need to exist in some format or another. Then we've got to think about implementation. Some people call this the deployment exercise. How are we going to get the project output operational? And I've seen some horror stories in my time of, yeah, we've planned a really good project. It's been fantastic, amazing all the way through until the point where we deliver it to the clients, where we just make a complete dog's dinner of it. There was this whole situation where I won't say which space agency this was at, but they were building this satellite, and it was showing you the project and how this inception came about and how they built this amazing satellite and how many thousands upon thousands and thousands of people hours went into its construction, and it was state of the art right up until the point they decided to ship it out to the customer, where they picked it up and then dropped it, and it was over £100 million worth of damage. So this is where you've got to think it through, not just from the idea, but how do we deliver this as well? Do we deliver all these elements of the project in 100%? Boom, we drop it. Or do we take on a more agile, realistic approach, whereas we deliver regular and often? So let me just give you a simple analogy here. Do we wait until the entire website is ready for delivery and then just deliver it? There we go, 100% launch, it's there. Or do we launch page by page as each page becomes operationally acceptable, or as an acceptable release, for example? There's a friend of mine who was involved in program managing a housing construction site, which was in the Greater London area. And it was quite literally hundreds upon hundreds of apartments. It doesn't matter where it was, but it's not far from the River Thames. And you kind of think the 100% drop, build all the apartments and then sell them all and get people to move in all at the same time. Or as they completed floor by floor, they were selling the apartments and making them, where it was safe to do so, available for people to move in. And this was a great way selling off plan, because it also kept the revenue coming in. Lots of things to consider. So when delivering the outputs, you've got to come up with an implementation plan. And project managers, you've got to develop this. And crucially, these are the sort of things that we're going to be looking at. When delivering the outputs, what should we consider? Are we implementing into a new business environment? So maybe we need to look at 100% drop. Maybe building and implementing into an existing environment. So maybe gradual saturation, allowing people the time to take on board the new ventures. Or is it going straight into a live environment? So we've got to get it right first time. Wow, huge risk exposure there. Are we decommissioning or removing legacy systems here? The sort of things that we need to consider. And that's the sort of thing where maybe you've got to do it site by site, area by area, whatever. Or in terms of implementing, are we making sure as well that there is training and knowledge transfer taking place between said parties? I'll leave the decision up to you. But when you start putting implementation plans together, think about this in your business environment. You might launch a new IT upgrade to your particular division within the business. What about the consequences elsewhere? Is it going to have implications around the enterprise? Or the existing portfolio? Just give it some thought. Remember, we've got to understand the implications of implementation and what it actually means. So just to have a look at some of the project needs and assessing these project needs and the potential complexity. We know that there is an agile environment, and agile really is looking at these two areas as well. But best suited, an agile environment when changes are relatively easy and waste is not costly. Complex environments where the end product is not fully known. That to me is the crucial factor here. Agile is brilliant when I know what I kind of need, what I want to get to, what I need to get to, what the vision's getting to. I just don't know how I'm going to get there. Sort of and this is why in software or IT areas, Agile is phenomenal. We know what we want. We're just not sure how we're going to get there. Predictive or plan-driven, this is where you start realizing changes can be expensive. For example, if you start building a property, an office block, and then you've put the foundations in, you're up to the first floor, and then you think, oh, you know what, I don't like that, let's change our mind. And all the builders look at you and they go, really, boss? Are we really doing this? Because we've got to demolish what we've built so far. We've got to excavate all the footings. This is going to be mega expensive. So, but when is it best to use this predictive plan approach? Low complexity, things like construction projects are ideal for this. Just remember, get the planning right to begin with. So there is a lot of intensive planning up front. Going back to the Agile environments, we've got Iterative. Now, Iterative is going over cycles. Each time you go through a cycle, we're learning. So just visualize this in your own minds. Once you've done iterative development in your workplace, you don't go out with this attitude of, right, let's hit this and nail it first time, 100%, boom. When we do iterative development, we go, okay, let's not aim to complete it now, but let's attempt at what we know so far with maybe an attitude of let's try and complete 70% of it. But we're going to learn all the way throughout. And then what we can do is we can introduce what we've learned to the remaining 30%, what has to be completed, without over-engineering a response. After all, how many times have you seen people work on projects where they haven't used iterative, but they thought these are correct amounts, so we've used quantity surveying, and you end up with just literally tons of overspill at the end. Loads of additional food or documents or materials, and you start thinking, whoa, had we used this whole iterative approach, it would be much more efficient. Let me give you a simple scenario. You're at a party and you don't know if there's going to be 50, 100, 150, 200 guests. So how much food do I cook? Well, what we've got the ability to freeze food, and then we can bring it out and we can cook it frozen in a relatively short period of time, say 15 to 20 minutes with the convection professional ovens. So what we do, we plan for, let's say, minimum. Let's do 70 people. Then if 120 people turn up, they don't usually all turn up together, so we can cater for those people as we come. This is iterative. We're going through, we're learning, and hopefully reducing the amount of waste that we make. This is a great opportunity to use the whole environment to learn as you go and introduce those lessons so that we don't repeat the bad examples. Incremental is another dynamic approach. So what we're doing here is we're working literally from milestone to milestone to milestone. So think of this in a project development as we start off. We incremental delivery, let's say, of a building could be put your footings in. You then put the walls on top, then put the roof on top of that, then you kit it out inside, then you sell it. These are incremental deliverables. So we build it up bit by bit by bit by bit. Each increment that we complete is adding value towards the goal, the completion, the vision statement of what the project represents. And really very, very useful when, as a project, customers or businesses want to get involved just to make sure it's heading in the correct direction. After all, how many times have you completed outputs within the project or program environments where the customer then goes, no, not happy with that. That's not what we were expecting. And you kind of think, but that's what we planned. That's what we discussed. Had we used this incremental attitude, then maybe that could have been averted. And this is where collaborating and having regular, clear and clear, this concise communications with your stakeholders can really alleviate some of the concerns that we get in modern day projects. Hybrid, of course, is taking the best of both worlds, as we've already said, and bringing it together, usually deriving some really good value add. Now, this is when you've got a project of all mixed requirements with a project team of all mixed capabilities. And if you have got Agile experienced project managers or team members, and you've got waterfall experienced individuals, XP experienced individuals, Scrum experienced individuals, you've got a proper mix hot pot there of all different capabilities and knowledge, proper T-shaped skills, real good breadth in terms of the overall knowledge. And that's when maybe a hybrid version really can provide excellent return on your investment. Progressive elaboration, very much the agile approach. And all this is, it's using your iterative knowledge to go through cycles. As you go through each cycle, we are waiting and working out how do we get to the end. As we go through each cycle, we are literally stopping and determining what lessons have we learned to make sure that when we go through the next cycle and we elaborate on the output even more, it's even better than before. So progressive elaboration, an iterative process of increasing the level of detail in a project management plan as greater amounts of knowledge and more accurate estimates become available. This is what we're talking about. We're elaborating our output, evolving the output towards completion. It's very much an evolving approach. And I think it's absolutely fantastic, because I'm going to use every step that I move forward to help me to develop greater understanding. So if we're talking about types of life cycles, what the whole project body of knowledge references is there are two. You've got predictive life cycles and you've got iterative life cycles. So what we're going to look at, let's first look at the whole predictive life cycle. And looking at this, we can see that we have a statement. Predictive life cycle, a form of project life cycle in which the project scope, time and costs are determined in the early phases of the life cycle. Now, to me, using predictive has massive advantages. Low complexity, really straightforward goal, we can do this. And as we've put down here, this is the preferred cycle to use when the project outcomes are well understood and known, such as enhancements to an established product. In other words, we're doing maybe upgrades, replacing old for new, that type of thing. Predictive cycles are formal and enable the project team to stay focused on each phase of the project before having to move forward into the next phase. A really good point. So there is low ambiguity here. It's great opportunity for a team to really get on and express themselves whilst following a very predictable model. Low risk, hopefully. Still needs control. We're not talking free for all, just get out there and let them loose. They still have to be conformant around all the areas of what the rules and regulations are in association to what the organization expects them to deliver. Okay, so make sure we have all that information to hand and make sure the teams are aware of it and make sure they follow it. Iterative life cycles are more dynamic. So as we've already discussed and alluded to earlier on, an iterative life cycle is a project life cycle where the project scope is generally determined early in the project life cycle, but time and cost estimates are routinely modified as the project team's understanding of the product increases. And what we're saying here, in an agile environment, that would be very much of the case of, whoa, as costs and times change, we don't want additional money, we don't want additional time, but we will relinquish the lower value add requirements. We'll just remove those. And these are the could have features. Yeah, let's get them out there. So the points that you need to remember, it's worth remembering this at the bottom of this slide as well. Achieving a project objective via iterations is best accomplished when leveraging the learning and successes as well as the failures from the previous iterations. Get the team to apply these. Put them into those up-and-coming life cycles. And as we've just looked at on previous slides, we can elaborate that detail as we move through. But we're constantly learning. Something that you need to start to really invest in terms of focusing your team towards. Now, don't get me wrong. Predictive life cycling, brilliant. But also there's some fantastic elements we can take away from using iterative life cycles and develop your team accordingly. Incremental life cycles is building it step by step by step. And what we're looking to do at the end of each of these life cycle steps, these increments as such is to ask ourselves, now where do we go from here in order to achieve our goal? So it is an adaptive project lifecycle in which the deliverable is produced through a series of iterations that successfully add functionality within the predetermined framework or time frame, whatever it is you want to call it. Now, that means, as I've already said, as we go from increments to increments to increments within an agile environment, what we have to remember here is we might say, for this increment here, this is what we're going to do, and give all the headlines and away the project can go in terms of the time boxing. Here, though, we may not be absolutely certain at this point what we're going to be doing in future increments. Because once we get to the end of the first increment here, or towards the end of the first increment here, we need to start planning, where do we go from here? And that might not be a predetermined path. And of course, what we thought we might have to do may need to change. And that's something we've also got to consider. Because as time evolves, I'm sure you've all experienced this, project managers, with the passage of time in your own environments. We've got a very robust project plan which needs to constantly change because of the ever-changing environment. When we're working with agility, these are things that really help us to overcome some of these elements, to make sure that there is huge levels of flexibility at the end of each increment to determine which direction we now need to head in. After all, customers, stakeholders, they change their minds. And I'm sure some of you have head in your hands thinking, if this person changes their mind one more time, I'm going to scream. That then leads us into the agile life cycles, which is really a culmination of all those areas that we've just discussed: iterative, incremental, agility. So we bring a lot of these areas together to help us to really focus on what products we are delivering. We're not so much focused on, and this is going on to something called the Agile Manifesto, where we're not just going to focus on the plan, but we're going to focus on the areas that need to change in order to achieve the output that the customer's expecting. And Agile gives us that huge level of flexibility, but whilst also being robust, sufficiently robust, in order to attain the goal. And for that reason, Agile comes with a lot of benefits. They also have a few concerns, but we'll discuss those concerns at the correct time. Then, of course, we've got the hybrid, which is a mixture, a hot pot of all of these elements, which I have to say really appeals to me, as I've already mentioned before. So start using some of these hybrid attitudes and methodologies when you've got a really diverse portfolio in your team. I'm talking about your team now, where you've got the skills, and we can start using those skills to the greater good. And maybe having a mixture of both of these methodologies will really help to deliver a complete full picture to the client, where we've got low complexity, low risk, and we've got a very clear vision of where we want to head forward. Use predictive planning. Where we're not sure of how we're going to complete the journey with certain aspects within the project, then we can start taking a more adaptive approach. I'll leave the decision up to you, but I hope you found this useful.